Hey guys, Dan here, aka Wolf, and today we're going to explore what potentially lies in store for humanity beyond the conclusion of Ellie's story arc if, in part 3, she ultimately reclaims her agency by choosing to sacrifice herself to create a vaccine. While it's natural to assume that such a conclusion would most certainly be the end of the series, I actually can't wait to illustrate for you that creating a vaccine would only be the beginning of endless possibilities to tell new and compelling stories in the rich, haunting, and beautiful world of The Last of Us. But first, I'm going to ask you, if you are jamming out to the content that I produce, subscribe to me. Leverage the unrivaled power of that notification bell. And don't forget to leave your love in the comments. In September of 2020, I published what would ultimately become my most powerful video to date: how Ellie and Abby will complete the hero's journey in The Last of Us Part 3. And if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, you can check that out in the link above. I mentioned this because an understanding of my pitch for Part 3 is relevant to our conversation here in this video about taking the story beyond the conclusion of Ellie's arc. And before we go any further, we should address the potential bloater in the room when it comes to vaccines and parasitic fungal infections. In common conversations among The Last of Us fans, you will often encounter the argument that there cannot be vaccines for fungal infections. You should know that despite what internet armchair critics would have you believe, there are in fact preemptive immunotherapies for fungal infections. It's a real thing, though we don't need it to be real to accept it as believable in the story. In Part 1 and Part 2, the characters are throwing around the term vaccine because it's easiest to understand and doesn't sound as lopsided and heavy-handed as immunotherapy or preemptive treatment. The fireflies are trying to develop a preventative cure in the form of a medical treatment that could preemptively protect individuals from becoming infested by a fungal parasite. Now, if you can believe in a world where Cordyceps can take over a complex organism like a human being, something far more unrealistic than fungal vaccines, then you can believe in a world where we can develop treatment for it by finding a human that is immune to the parasite, regardless of what technically defines a vaccine. And we can be thankful that our characters are not saying something as terrible as immunotherapy every time an emotional scene comes up surrounding Ellie's immunity. It's important to remember that, at the end of the day, The Last of Us is art and storytelling, not a simulation of real life. If it was, we wouldn't have mushroom zombies. With that out of the way, it's important to understand that creating a Cordyceps vaccine does not equal an end game for beating Cordyceps. Far from it. All of our lovely, lovely forms of human Cordyceps variants aren't going anywhere soon, even with a vaccine in play. It's important to remember that a vaccine is only preventative. It's not a way to bring someone who is already infected back to being human. That person is long gone. And just because the vaccine has been created doesn't mean that every living human will easily have access to it, at least not for some years to come. Critical to perpetuating tension in this desolate world, control and dissemination of the vaccine would become a new source of conflict between the Fireflies and other factions. Possession of something as critical as a vaccine would give the Fireflies immense power, and with immense power comes power struggles, enough to set the stage for interesting background tension while we are introduced to new human characters and their stories to fall in love with. While the vaccine could potentially lead to unity between the human factions, this outcome is not very likely. We must remember Joel's doubtful reaction to Ellie being immune at the beginning of Part 1, which tells us there are many who would probably think that news of a vaccine is a trap or a lie, at least in the beginning. Furthermore, there are bound to be those few individuals who, once administered the vaccine, become infected and turn instead of becoming immunized, a term referred to as vaccine breakthrough infection. And even if that number is as low as 1 in 1,000 vaccinated individuals, news of it happening even once is terrifying enough to spark a panic and foment distrust in the Fireflies, especially in their enemies who would would seek to spread propaganda against them. Knowing that there is even the slightest chance to become infected by accepting the vaccine could be reason enough for many to distrust it, or simply take their chances without it, especially when you consider the odds of even surviving an encounter where you would be bitten or scratched by infected without being immediately killed is probably not very high in the first place. This gets even more complex when you relate this to the real-life theme of certain people's distrust of vaccines in our contemporary COVID-19 world. And even if the vaccine is somehow disseminated to most known factions and communities in time, Naughty Dog could give us a very satisfying plot twist to perpetuate the series by having Cordyceps mutate to find other mammals to serve as its hosts. Imagine the terror of encountering the first known infected dog or infected horses. Are we ready to take on an infected grizzly bear? What about the behemoth of a bloater elephant that's been sealed away in a spore-filled zoo for 20 years? Encountering new and frightening forms of infected creatures intermixed with old human infected locked away is enough to perpetuate stories in the world of The Last of Us for generations to come, while still allowing Ellie to pass into legend as her sacrifice for mankind is remembered and celebrated by all. Some of you might be thinking that all of this conflict might mean that Ellie's sacrifice was all for nothing. But that actually could not be further from the truth. If Ellie's sacrifice eventually brings most of mankind protection from the spores, forcing Cordyceps to evolve to stay alive, then she did bring forth the beginning of its end, ultimately saving us all.